Hi, everybody. Mr. Hanley here, of course. We're going to pick up where we left off. This is your video for Thursday, December 3rd. We've been talking about Julius Caesar before, and he had fought against Pompey, and he had come to Egypt and come all the way down to Egypt in pursuit of him. Pompey was gone, and so he wasn't gone, he was dead. And so we're going to talk about what happened while he was down there. So while he was down in Egypt... Oh, wait a minute. There we go. While he was down in Egypt, he actually got involved in a war for the throne between the young pharaoh Ptolemy and the co-regent sister Cleopatra the Seventh over control of Egypt. So back in these days, remember, Ptolemy was the original Ptolemy was the one of the four generals under Alexander the Great, who had their area split, and so he was over the Egyptian area of Alexander the Great's kingdom, and so from then on, every king was named Ptolemy, and every queen was named Cleopatra. This was Ptolemy like the 15th or 16th, and this is Cleopatra the 7th. They were brother and sister. They were also married, as weird as that is. That's just part of the culture then. Just because they were married doesn't mean they were actually like what we think of a husband and wife. It was more just a ceremonial thing where like she and him like didn't have kids together or anything. It was just like they believed the royal family should be in charge. Now, and so they weren't like romantic or anything. They were just by law married together. So they were both co-regents over Egypt, but he was actually younger, and she thought he was kind of useless. And so Cleopatra, this Cleopatra the Seventh, doesn't actually like him at all and wants to get rid of him and wants power for herself. She's kind of like we talked about her before when we talked about ancient Egypt. She's kind of like a take charge kind of woman, takes what she wants, as we're going to see. So while Julius Caesar is there, she kind of influences him to come to her side, and she kind of and she gets him to come to her side and uses him as an ally, and he sees her as an ally, and so influenced with that, for the fact that she desired to have him on her side, and she showed him the respect and everything. It was like, you're a great leader and this and that. He also was really angry at the assassins who had assassinated Pompey, and they were on the brother's side. So he was like, in addition to helping you, I also don't like his side because they assassinated Pompey. So there was a civil war going on, and Caesar and his forces sided with Cleopatra the Seventh and helped her, and they killed her brother, and he helped her gain the throne. Then she kind of seduced him, and he started a relationship with her. Cleopatra the Seventh. I mean, he started a relationship with her back then, and the two of them had a son who she named Caesarion. Obviously, Caesar, Caesarion. It's very close to his name. Some people, it's not technically known for sure that he was her son, but he was her son, and so. But then he has to leave. He has to come back to Italy. So he's there for a couple of years, has a relationship with Cleopatra, and she kind of, we're going to see, she kind of viewed that as like a way that she could kind of increase her power. She likes to have a way to increase power. She may have loved him as well. I don't know, but she definitely viewed it as a way that she could further her position in government, that she now has taken over all of Egypt. But if she has a son with Julius Caesar, maybe her son will be the next emperor, that she's kind of looking to try to further her family line. So he comes back to Italy and defeats the rest of his opposition, which now he's officially basically dictator of all of Rome, all the Roman Empire. He's kind of dictator over all of it. He also files his will, naming his grandnephew Gaius Octavian as his successor. So this kind of flies in the face of what Cleopatra was hoping. Cleopatra was hoping her son Caesarion was going to be the next emperor But he files his will and he names his grandnephew Gaius Octavian. Now, how can he be a grandnephew when Julius Caesar isn't that old? There's, him being a younger, Caesar could be a younger guy. I don't know. It's his grandnephew, this guy named Gaius Octavian. And he says at this point he wants Octavian to be his successor when and if he dies at that point. So, let's move on. The very next year, and this is going to happen, his death is going to happen a lot sooner than he planned. The next year, Julius Caesar was attending a meeting of the Senate when all of a sudden 60 senators, the Optimates faction, swarmed him and they all stabbed him to death. It's a very famous thing that happened. There's a picture of it. All these guys running up with all the knives, like that. They all stabbed him to death. Among them was Marcus Junius Brutus, who was a very close friend of Julius Caesar. And so, picture of Brutus right there. Brutus had taken Pompey's side in the Civil War, but Caesar was very adamant about no one hurting him. This is what is known for sure, that even though Brutus had taken Pompey's side, Caesar actually views Brutus as a very close friend. And he was adamant, nobody's allowed to hurt Brutus. Do not hurt Brutus. Do not hurt Brutus. Part of the reason that some historians look back at is that Julius Caesar, there's actually a chance Julius Caesar could have been Brutus's father. He actually had Julius Caesar had a relationship when he was really, really young with Brutus's mother, who was also fairly young. Like he was young, like 15, 16 years old or whatever. And around this time, Brutus's mother had him, Brutus. So there was some thought that Julius Caesar, even among Julius Caesar, that he might be Brutus's father. So he kind of always had it wasn't like a public thing though, but he had always thought that maybe he was his father and he didn't really know. But either way, they were friends, they were friendly, and he liked Brutus. And Brutus is one of the conspirators who killed Caesar. And in his involvement either way, even if he wasn't actually his father, was considered a betrayal. In Shakespeare, there's one of Shakespeare's plays, along with Romeo and Juliet and Othello and Hamlet and Macbeth. One of his plays is Julius Caesar, telling about the life of Julius Caesar. And there's a very famous last words that Shakespeare gives him that say, et tu, Brute, or even you, Brutus, like even you betrayed me as well, and he dies. So Julius Caesar gets assassinated 1 year after taking power. The thing you need to know about Julius Caesar is that he was part of the First Triumvirate. He took power. He was also the governor of Gaul. He increased the Roman Empire all the way to Britain. He took power. He went down to Egypt, had a relationship with Cleopatra the Seventh, had a son, and then he came back and was assassinated. He was there. Now we come to the Second Triumvirate. After his death, a Second Triumvirate formed between Octavian. Remember, Octavian is Caesar's grandnephew. Mark Antony is Caesar's like right-hand man, his assistant. It was like his Joshua to Caesar's Moses. Like if Caesar's Moses, and then Mark Antony would kind of be Joshua, like his second in command, which is going to come into play. And then they have another guy named Lepidus. Gaius Octavian, as I said, Caesar's heir. He named him successor in his will. He's his grandnephew. Mark Antony, his right-hand man. And there's Marcus Lepidus. He's the commander of Caesar's cavalry unit. Remember cavalry? What are cavalry soldiers? Somebody raise your hand. What are cavalry soldiers? Caden, what is it? Yes, they are horseback riders in an army. So these three guys are the Second Triumvirate. You're going to have to know who's in the First Triumvirate. Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. You're going to have to know who's in the Second Triumvirate. Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus. But, as you can see, this seems like these three guys, one of these things is not like the other, right? In that you have Octavian, one of Caesar's most beloved family members, his grandnephew who's named in his will, Mark Antony, Caesar's best friend, right-hand member in his army, and Lepidus, who just has some horse soldiers that he's in charge of. Well, the Second Triumvirate attacked and defeated the allies of Brutus, who had assassinated Caesar. So those guys who assassinated Caesar, they're gone. Now the Second Triumvirate is in play. But after a short time, people don't like to share power. That is always the case. You know, people, if you know, whenever you have like in the olden days, in the Wild West, you'd have a group of bank robbers. Let's say there's 5 guys who go and rob a bank, and then they get back there, and what happens? They split the money, but there's always an argument over splitting the money, and a couple of them try to kill the other guys because they don't want to split it as many ways. It's an old tale. It's cliche almost that it always happens because, you know, as the old phrase goes, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that the more power you have, the more corrupt you get and the more power you want. And so these 3 guys don't like having to share power with Lepidus, and so they say, hey, you know, if we kind of get rid of Lepidus, there'll be only 2, and that helps us to kind of have more power. So it's a triumvirate for a little while, but unlike Crassus, who died in war, and he was the first one he was the one to end the first triumvirate because he died in war, they just kind of push Lepidus to the side and say, yeah, you go over there, we don't really need you anymore. And so Octavian and Mark Antony now go and there's only the Second Triumvirate's gone. As soon as it starts, it's gone. And they split the kingdom in half. Octavian took the west toward Greece. No, that's the east. The west toward like France and Gaul and Spain. And Mark Antony took the east, like Egypt and Asia Minor and stuff. And even though they had worked together to get Lepidus out, it was only a short time later that they were rivals. Mark Antony saw Egypt as a good place to base his operations. He met Cleopatra there, and he fell in love with her. So the first powerful man that comes into Egypt, she's like, hey, I love you. Be in a relationship with me. Second powerful guy, she's like, hey, how about me? And they actually, although the historians say they really were in love, they did really seem to be in love. And as you can see, they have the same death date there, which we are going to get into. I don't know if we'll get into it this time, but we'll get there soon. And he stayed down in Egypt. He wanted to base his operations in Egypt at Alexandria. And so he stayed down there for a few years, even though he had like a home and a family back in Italy. He stayed down there, fell in love with her, and had 3 children with her. This is actually despite the fact that he actually had a prior wife at home named Octavia. Now, does that name sound familiar? Octavia, where have I heard that name before? She's Octavian's sister. So yet another reason that Octavian is not very happy with him. He's jealous of Mark Antony for power. He wants all the power for himself. Octavian does. Plus, Octavian is actually Mark Antony's brother-in-law, and Mark Antony goes down to Egypt and kind of has children with Cleopatra. Not kind of. He does have children with Cleopatra as a relationship with her, and kind of leaves Octavia back home. After Mark Antony spent 10 years in Egypt, 10 years, leaving his wife at home, Octavian starts planning on how to get rid of him. Octavian slyly came up with the idea to read Mark Antony's will before the Senate. Why was this sly? Well, Mark Antony had changed his will to leave all of his money to his children by Cleopatra instead of his family back in Rome. So the Roman Senate viewed it as basically him being a betrayer, him favoring the Egyptians over his home Rome, and the Senate viewed that as like, how could he do that? And he would have them reign over his Egyptian kingdom, and the Roman Senate did not like this. The Senate said it was a scandal. How could he do this? And they denounced Mark Antony. So this was very smart plotting by Octavian. And now that it was public, he's like, well, why keep it a secret any longer? He divorces Octavia, Mark Antony does, and officially marries Cleopatra. Octavian got the Senate, though, to declare war on Cleopatra's Egyptian kingdom. And the Senate declared, though 40% of it sided with Mark Antony, they liked Mark Antony better than Octavian. The Senate, a majority of the Senate did want war against Mark Antony. They declare war, and they go down to war against Egypt. Octavian's forces easily beat the forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, but we'll have to wait to see what happens to them until tomorrow, because I have 10 seconds left. All right, guys, I'll make one more video for tomorrow, for Friday, and I'll post homework. See you later. Bye.